Who better than a great French theater actor, a lover of Molière's words, to help us understand him?
Dans Les Femmes Savantes, il y a un silence, il y a peut-être dramaturgiquement un des plus grands quiproquos arrondis, puissants, efficaces, éternellement drôles. Il y a un valet au moment de cette scène qui arrive et qui dit « Il y a quelqu'un qui veut vous voir, c'est un pote à Trissotin, il s'appelle Vadius. » Et là, Trissotin qui est là va lui dire « Avez-vous vu certains petits sonnets sur la fièvre qui tient la princesse Uranie ?» Il est en train de proposer sa dernière création. Hein. Vadius va répondre « Oui, hier il me fut lu dans une compagnie. Vous en savez l'auteur ? Non, mais je sais très bien qu'à ne le point flatter, son sonnet ne vaut rien. Beaucoup de gens pourtant le trouvent admirable. Ça n'empêche pas qu'il ne soit misérable. Et si vous l'avez vu, vous serez de mon goût. Je sais que là-dessus, je n'y suis point du tout. Regardez bien la langue de Molière. Je sais que là-dessus, je n'y suis point du tout. Ça y est, on sent la vexation. Hein. Je sais que là-dessus, je n'y suis point du tout. Je sais que là-dessus, je n'y suis point du tout et que d'un tel sonnet, peu de gens sont capables. Oh, me préserve le ciel d'en faire de semble. Je soutiens qu'on ne peut en faire de meilleur. Et ma grande raison, c'est que j'en suis l'auteur. Vous, ce silence-là, c'est vraiment du Molière.
Molière not only revolutionized theater, but he also shocked his contemporaries with the way he conducted his private life. On this winter day in 1662, in this Parisian church, Molière experiences one of the greatest moments of his life as a man. He marries the woman of his heart, a very young woman whom he is madly in love with.
It's very moving to find oneself in this church and think that the tiles we walk on are the same ones Molière and Armand stepped on as they moved toward the altar.
For their wedding, the two lovebirds are surrounded by only a few close friends and family. Molière wished for a discreet wedding, and for good reason. Gossip is already rife within his own family.
On the wedding day, there is a first paradox, the union of two actors in a church, which was complicated. Indeed, at the time, actors were excommunicated. Because actors pretend, thus they tell lies, and are competing with divine speech in a way. But also, this marriage is absolutely seen as a scandal. Molière, 40 years old, marries a 20-year-old young girl.
This young woman is named Armande Béjart. Molière watched her grow up in his troupe, alongside her mother, Madeleine Béjart, the first great love of his life. After having a passionate love story with the mother 20 years earlier, Molière marries the daughter.
It's as scandalous as when Woody Allen married Soon-Yi Previn, who was sort of the adopted daughter of Mia Farrow. He went from mother to daughter.
The news is making a big splash across Paris, as marrying the daughter of a former partner is prohibited by the church at the time. But the story is more complex than it seems. This union is shrouded in mystery because on the marriage certificate, Armande is not listed as Madeleine's daughter, but as her sister. To know the truth, we must go back 20 years.
Madeleine Béjart, like most actresses of the time, of course, had a lover. This lover is named Modène, one of the highest-ranking figures in the Kingdom of France. So he has a family, but the problem is that Madeleine Béjart becomes pregnant. She is very young and absolutely does not want to have an abortion.
Esprit Raymond, Count of Modène, refuses to acknowledge this child, so Armande is an illegitimate daughter. This child needs a father and a mother, and they will choose the grandparents.
It is therefore Joseph Béjart and Marie Hervé, her grandparents, who will be listed on Armande's certificate of baptism as her parents.
Why was she baptized in 1653 or 54? because by then she was old enough that no one would question exactly when she was born. And when Molière marries Armande, they had to play with the fiction. The fiction is that since the baptism in 1653, Armande is the daughter of Marie Hervé and Joseph Béjart.
Behind the scenes, no one doubts Armande's identity. She is indeed Madeleine's daughter, which makes Molière a former father-in-law at the mercy of slander.
Everyone close to them knew that Molière had married Madeleine Béjart's daughter. Some even joked about the fact that he might have married his own daughter.
So the idea is to completely discredit the actor, to have him arrested, imprisoned. He must be totally destroyed.
A disgusting letter arrives on the king's desk saying, Armande is Molière's daughter. It's incest, so it deserves 20 years on a galley. Signed, a friend with good intentions, Montfleury.
So actually, what did Montfleury want? To force Molière to request the approval from the Pope transmitted by the king. He just wanted to bother Molière, simply put.
And what does the king reply? Well, I will be a witness to the marriage. That's very strong.
Why were there no consequences? Because officially they were in the clear. Armande's certificate of baptism and Molière's marriage certificate stated that she was not Madeleine's daughter, but the daughter of Marie Hervé, the grandmother, and so legally, everything was in order.
At barely 40 years old, Molière has achieved his two dearest dreams, to marry and to make a living from drama. And one name, just one, is linked to these two successes, the Béjart, Armande, and Madeleine. Before they entered the life of Jean-Baptiste Poquelin, who would have bet on such a destiny? Here, in the heart of Paris, in Les Halles, Jean-Baptiste is born in a luxurious apartment located at the corner of Rue des Vieilles Latives and Rue Saint-Honoré, just a few steps from Saint-Eustache Church, where he is baptized on January 15th, 1622.
Jean-Baptiste Poquelin is the son of an upholsterer and a young woman who also belongs to the Parisian bourgeoisie. He is born into a rather austere family. His father obtains the position of upholsterer of the king, and the young Jean-Baptiste grows up in this extremely lively neighbourhood of Les Halles. There are merchants. There are also prostitutes who have to hide in the corners. There are priests. There are executioners. There are convicts. Under his windows, there is the Trouar Crossroads, where there is a gallows where executioners can come to punish, hang, or even kill people who have been found guilty. It's bustling. You have to imagine that little Jean-Baptiste Poquelin sees life as a constant play.
During his rather comfortable childhood, young Jean-Baptiste is introduced to theatre by his grandfather. Just a few meters from his home, in the residence of the Dukes of Burgundy, is one of the very first Parisian theatres of the time, of which only a small part remains today, the Tour Jean Sans-Peur.
Here we are in a place typical of medieval architecture, with its immense cut stones and monumental ribbed vaults. And this place, which Molière knew, was the largest Parisian theatre of his childhood. And he went there, probably from the age of 9, with his grandfather.
That kid who seats in the cheapest seats watches and sees these actors performing in the following way. Brass, be sure of this. Though she's unjust, she is my mother. Here is exactly how they played in the 17th century. And that kid really hates this totally stupid performance.
Jean-Baptiste, however, admires, when he leaves the theatre, the artists of Pont-Neuf by the Seine. And it's a revelation.
He sees on platforms the Coluchet, the Fernand Reynaud, the Gad Elmaleh, the Danny Boone, the Jamel Debbouze of the time. They are street performers of the Pont-Neuf, standing on platforms so that thousands of people howl with laughter. And it's important to understand that it's the shock of his life. They create new characters, and suddenly he realizes, but it's just like in real life.
At first, like any good son of a bourgeois family, Jean-Baptiste Poquelin still studies with the Jesuits at the College of Clermont. But his mind is elsewhere. And soon, an encounter will change everything.
The triggering element that very likely pushed Jean-Baptiste Poquelin towards comedy was his meeting with Madeleine Béjart.
First, the Béjart are a family. There is Marie Hervé, the mother who keeps everyone together. There is Geneviève. There is the limping brother. And then there is Madeleine, the tall redhead, as they called her. She is splendid, and she dreams of being a great actress at the Hôtel de Bourgogne.
At the age of 15, she was capable of writing verses. It was known that she sang well, danced well, played all sorts of instruments, and had an extremely pleasant conversation. In other words, she was groomed to become a great courtesan.
He is seduced by Madeleine Béjart. Molière probably had his first night of love with a woman, with her.
Madeleine introduces the young Poquelin to love, and also ignites an irresistible desire in him to perform on stage. On June 30th, 1643, Molière and Madeleine have a meeting that will change their lives. They are full of emotion and excitement. On this day, they fulfill their greatest dream, to create their own troupe of actors. Together, in the presence of a notary, they finally formalize the birth of the Illustre Theatre.
June 1643, we have the founding act of the Illustre Theatre.
And so he goes to a notary to sign this document, and just as he is about to sign, he starts by signing. Poquelin? No. And so he writes Molière.
Why did Jean-Baptiste Poquelin call himself Molière? He said nothing about it. Is Molière a reference to ivy winding on walls? Is it the name of a village like the tragedians Montfleury or Floridor? Is it Molière like Molière, the French for gritstone, the rock used to make houses? Or a word engraved at the time on a stone of the Champs-Élysées? Or again the name of a libertine author? Everyone has their hypothesis.
The entrance of the theatre was right here, and you can still see the plaque where you can read. Here stood the Jeu de Paume des Métayers, where Molière's troupe opened the Illustre Theatre in December 1643.
So it's very daring because there are already two well-established companies, the Théâtre de Bourgogne and the Théâtre du Marais, and the Illustre Théâtre will take advantage of the fire at the Théâtre du Marais to launch their business.
Then, crash, October 1644, the Théâtre du Marais reopens with the most beautiful theatre in Paris in terms of decoration, machinery, etc. And it becomes apparent, according to the testimonies of the theatre's concierge who will sue them, that there is no one coming to the theatre anymore.
Molière, who invested his mother's inheritance in his theatre, ends up in prison for debts. His father pays them and has him released. But there's no question of giving up. If Paris isn't charmed, there is more than just Paris. Molière quickly finds a new opportunity far from the capital, because in the 17th century, Cardinal Richelieu encourages actors to spread theatre to the most remote countryside.
Richelieu is going to send 1,000 actors on the roads of France.
What he wants is to impose, in a way, the influence of the French language in Europe.
And these troops are in fact spokespersons, both for political power and religious power.
Molière then embarks with his troupe on an incredible journey and crosses the most beautiful provinces of the kingdom. In 1649, he is in Guyenne, in the southwest of France, at the Château de Cadillac.
It's a very luxurious, sumptuous castle, which was built at the beginning of the 17th century. It was part of a vast estate that included a French formal garden at the back, a large park, stables, a riding hall, a room to play the Jeu de Paume, and later, an orangery.
Within the beautiful woodwork of this castle, the young Molière finds his first protector, Bernard de Nogaret de la Valette, Duke of Épernon. And this is just the beginning. Soon he is called further east, in Languedoc. With Molière, we are far from the romanticized image of the poor street performer without a penny, because his theater interests only the provincial elites. In 1653, he arrives at Pézenas. He then performs at the Grange des Prés, the magnificent estate of Prince de Conti.
Armand de Conti, the brother of the great Condé, is a rather complex and ambiguous character, physically hunchbacked, in love with his sister Madame de Longueville, Prince of the Blood, who is even in the line of succession to the throne. If ever Louis XIV dies, he is among the presumptive heirs to the crown.
Well, Conti is very powerful in the entire region, from Gironde all the way to Provence.
Immediately charmed by Molière's personality, the prince offers him all his affection, but also his valuable financial support. Molière's stay in Pézenas is documented by exceptional documents signed by his hand.
These are two receipts where Molière attests to having received sums of money. The first document dates from December 17, 1650, and we can read, "I received from Monsieur de Penautier the sum of 4,000 livres ordered to the comedian by the gentlemen of the States." The second document dates from February 1656, and the document is signed Molière. So it is completely clear that Molière was indeed in Pézenas, since he received money for performances given at that time.
Under the protection of Conti, Molière now dares to start writing his own plays while frequenting the taverns of Pézenas. Alongside Madeleine Béjart, he learns to closely observe his contemporaries, and everything inspires him, even the most trivial incident. A tipsy and stingy customer who refuses to pay for his drink is a godsend. Immediately, Molière is able to imitate him and turn him into a comedic character that makes his dear Madeleine laugh. In reality, during his stay in Pézenas, everything inspires him.
There you have the house of the barber Gélis. He was a great friend of Molière, and he had his shop here. It was a place where people liked to chat, talk about the city's affairs, tell stories about the town, and so on. But in addition, the barber Gélis had his shop front on this square. Molière had an extraordinary observation post, for all cities' markets came here. The winemakers, the fine ladies who strolled, the doctors looking for clients. Moreover, hearing people recounting the week's events with humor. And it is in this atmosphere that Pézenas met Molière, and Molière met Pézenas.
Marcel Pagnol said centuries later, if Jean-Baptiste Poquelin was born in Paris, Molière was born in Pézenas. Everywhere he goes, Molière creates an event, but his protector, the Prince of Conti, suddenly distances himself from him.
The Prince of Conti, who was a notorious libertine, contracts syphilis after having sex with a woman, so the Prince of Conti is suffering from ailments that are terrible, notably headaches. In any case, he receives treatments that are absolutely real tortures. And there, he meets the Bishop of Alais, who will become his confessor. And since they live in a century where the salvation of their soul is very important, the Bishop of Alais will guide the Prince de Conti towards less pleasure, less debauchery.
Among the pleasures, theater ranks at the top of the list. The decision of the Prince of Conti is not long in coming.
Conti put an end to subsidies for actors to a vote. From now on, the ministers who go to the theatre will pay for their seat. But free invitations with subsidies are over. So the sum of money that each year more than supplemented the troupe's income suddenly stopped.
Those 12 years spent traveling the roads of France allow Molière to gain some notoriety. But back in Paris, it's another audience he will have to win over. Louvre Palace, October 24th, 1658. Today, Molière is gambling his future on a roll of the dice. Finally, he will perform for the first time in front of Louis XIV. This moment he dreamed of so much was made possible by the one who became his protector since his return to Paris in 1658.
The young Philip, Duke of Anjou, the king's only brother, must do what all the greatest princes of Europe do, that is, have a theatre troupe. But which troupe? Well, we search what is the best troupe around, and the answer is the former troupe of Conti, Molière's troupe.
Monsieur is very proud, of course, to have his own troupe, and Molière obviously is over the moon since he stands there in front of the second most important person of the kingdom, of the state. He is the direct heir of Louis XIV.
But tonight, it is Louis XIV, and no one else that needs to be convinced. Molière is overwhelmed with stage fright, as the young king is a very discerning spectator.
Louis XIV will be immersed in theater from a very young age. Mazarin is fond of theater. Anne of Austria is fond of theater. Monsieur is fond of theater. And tragedy, since it's the noble genre, is a mandatory part of daily life at the court.
To put all the odds in his favor, Molière chooses to perform a play by the king of tragedy, Corneille. The atmosphere is solemn. Molière's heart is racing.
So here we are in the room where Molière performed for the first time in front of King Louis XIV, the Hall of the Caryatids, here in the heart of the Louvre. As you can see, this room is sublime. It is one of the most beautiful places of the Louvre from the Renaissance. It's a public room, a guard room, but also a ballroom for performances, concerts, music, and the king's entertainment. And there is this decor by Jean Goujon, the sculptor, with these figures, these caryatids, these female figures holding the platform where the musicians were seated. And this masterpiece provided a setting for Molière. It's a key moment, because the king waits to be seduced. At that moment, the king is dedicated to his pleasures, and Molière obviously has a card to play in this area and will first come to perform a tragedy.
Molière's troupe perform it differently than what was ordinarily done, that is to say, without great declamation, in a more natural way, like recommended by Molière.
But things are not going well. Why? Because the king knows the play. He has already seen it 3 or 4 times. So now he understands it. He knows that we do not roll the R's. We do not emphasize the rhyme and the hemistich. We speak a certain way, and if you read Nicomede, it is a real political moral lesson that is quite important. The entire court understands. Everyone looks at each other saying, "But how will the king react?" Standing up was to create a scandal. Falling asleep was indecent. Interrupting was impossible, and so he has this formidable royal gesture. He yawns. And so the entire of the court starts to yawn.
Molière is disheartened. The failure is stinging. But he will have a second chance because Monsieur, the brother of Louis XIV, knows that those years spent in the provinces have endowed him with multiple talents.
My dear friend, would you please perform one of your farces?
And so, Molière, standing before the king, says, "Now, I am going to present you one of those little play that worked very well in the provinces." But what does a play that works very well in the provinces mean? It means it's one of the comedies that bring together the French people, that bring together the French language. It might be one of the comedies imposed by Richelieu.
And at that moment,
Molière makes this spectacular improvisation, going off in all directions, and everyone laughs. Even the king cries with laughter.
Molière succeeded. He gained the trust of his king. A first privilege is granted to him. To make Louis XIV laugh, he now has a free theater, the Petit Bourbon, which he shares with the Italian comedians.
But at that time, sharing was perfect because there was not a performance every day. Troupes usually performed on the regular days, so Tuesday, Friday, Sunday. And so, what Molière's troupe is going to do, they're going to take the other days, Wednesday, Thursday, and Saturday.
And it is when the Commedia dell'arte entered in Molière's plays and in his repertoire.
Scaramouche, Pantaloon, Columbine, Harlequin. They are real living puppets, but unlike others, their bodies speak for them, not the face, but the body. Fake noses, etc. It is the body that speaks for them, and that struck him.
Molière develops his art of comedy, but to please the king, he also has another asset that gives him an advantage over his competitors. First quarter of 1660. On this day, Molière takes on a new role in the service of Louis XIV. He's now the valet tapissier of the king's chamber, a position originally held and performed by his father Jean Poquelin, then by his brother, who has just passed away. 1/4 of a year, Molière must accompany, monitor, and organize the furnishing of the king's chamber from one castle to another, since, at that time, Louis XIV does not yet reside in Versailles. Molière carries out his task with great enthusiasm. Not only does it allow him to bear the very honorable title of squire, the first rank of nobility, but above all, it gives him direct access to the king. Molière now has a privileged access to the court.
We are here in a room of Louis XIV at Versailles, and it is in this type of space that the ceremony of the king's rising took place every morning. The organization of the chamber is something very complex. Hundreds of people serve the king. A first groom of the bedchamber, the valet de garde-robe, ushers, etc. It's a whole mechanism, a sort of hive that revolves around the king, and Molière is one of these elements. The 150 people who are here every morning include not only the chamber staff, but also the cream of the court. So we have all the marquises, all the dukes, all the ambassadors, and Molière is there observing them, seeing how each one tries to stand out, and he explains, for instance, how to correctly take the king's seat. He also explains that you have to lift your hat to show yourself to the usher, saying, "Mr. So-and-so here for Mr. So-and-so," etc. So we have a real social fertile ground, where Molière can dig into to write his plays.
From then on, Molière never leaves the king. He serves him as an actor in the afternoon and as a valet in the morning.
Louis XIV will greatly appreciate that he holds this role without overstepping it, being neither the friend, nor the actor, nor the director, nor the author. He is the servant. On the other hand, when it comes to stage, there will be great complicity between the two. There is a 16-year age difference, the king being younger, and at that moment, Molière, no longer the Jean-Baptiste Poquelin of the morning, but the Molière of the afternoon, becomes the big brother.
But Molière, who is successful in all he does, is far from imagining that an unexpected event could jeopardize everything.
In March 1661, Molière and his troupe sea demolishers arrive at the Petit Bourbon, sent by Ratabon, the superintendent of buildings, tasked with expanding the Louvre Palace. Molière therefore no longer has a theatre. Fortunately, at his request, Louis XIV relocates him to the Palais Royal in a hall built 20 years earlier by Richelieu in his cardinal palace. What wouldn't Louis XIV do for his Molière?
A scene wonderfully illustrates the protection granted to Molière by Louis XIV. It is recounted in the memoirs of Madame Campan, Marie Antoinette's first lady's maid, who places it at the king's morning reception, likely in the early 1660s. That morning, Louis XIV is, as usual, alone at his table, under the gaze of the courtiers. Suddenly, a valet brings him surprising news. In the office, they refuse to serve Molière, his valet tapissier.
What do you mean they don't want to serve him? Have him come to my table.
Louis XIV, when he learned that Molière had been somewhat scorned, neglected, ostracised during a meal taken by all the chamber servants in the Great Common, is said to have told Molière before the entire court, "They scorn you? Well, sit next to me and share my meal."
Mr. Molière, please sit down.
Molière at the king's table. That seems unthinkable, and it's probably a legend. But we can easily imagine what a comedian might feel when invited to a place where no one is allowed to sit. This scene inspired 19th century painters. We can guess that the court was stunned and Molière very intimidated. It is said that Louis XIV himself would have served his valet.
Can you serve him some wine, please?
Around the king, people whisper. They are already conspiring, and the jealousy of the courtiers does not take long to show itself. One day, Molière is walking through the Louvre Palace. He feels good, for the king watches over him, and so nothing can happen to him. He encounters an aristocrat, the Duke of La Feuillade, who seems to want to congratulate him on his recent successes with Louis XIV. But the scene quickly takes another turn. Instead of greeting him like a gentleman, the Duke grabs Molière and tries to violently rub his face against the buttons of his jacket. Molière manages to free himself. He seems injured. This humiliation, symbol of the relentless war waged at court, is reported in the 19th century by biographers in full romanticism.
I don't think we realise the importance of the role that Molière had at the court. That is to say, not only was he an artist, but besides that, he was a grooms of the bedchamber, meaning he was part of the king's household. No one would have ever touched an officer of the king's household.
Despite his detractors, Molière now has free rein with the king. For his new grand celebration in the gardens of Versailles, the pleasures of the Enchanted Island, Louis XIV names him Grand Master of Ceremonies, and Molière will enjoy it wholeheartedly.
In 1664, for this great celebration organized by the king, the Palace of Versailles is absolutely not the same as today. The Versailles we know will be inaugurated in 1685. Molière dies in 1673, so he never knew it. But how was the castle during Molière's time? It was a hunting lodge that Louis XIII had built, which corresponded to about 3/4 of this large facade, surrounded by moats. And there were the gardens that Le Nôtre started to design.
The celebration must be sumptuous. Molière has prepared no less than 4 meticulously refined plays. It is at the site of the future ballroom grove, one of the most majestic envisioned by Le Nôtre, that the show begins.
So this celebration is going to be considerable. It won't be just one day or one evening of festivities. There will be 8 days of celebration in an absolutely incredible setting. There was, for example, a dagger race for the men, a visit to the menagerie for the women. Molière will appear dressed as a jester. He plays a fool and will make everyone laugh.
Molière plays a very, very important role in this celebration and will present the Princess of Elise to also flatter the king. Indeed, there is an adultery in this plays, and the king feels somewhat comforted by this adultery.
Officially, this celebration is organized in honor of the Queen Mother and the wife of Louis XIV. But in reality, the king's heart is elsewhere.
Everyone thought it was also to celebrate the king's love for Mademoiselle de la Vallière, who was his official mistress. And one of the men who orchestrates this celebration was the Duke of Saint-Aignan, who is somewhat the king's pimp, to be honest. He's the one who brings women to his bed every day or every night. And it's through him that this true conception of a religion of love practiced at the court evolves.
The Princess of Ellis. What is it? It's the desire to love. It's a magnificent ode to love to remind the court that youth, tenderness, spring, and intoxication are also part of the reign of Louis XIV.
The celebration is a triumph. More than 600 guests. The most dedicated stay an entire week and sleep in their carriages. Molière, for his part, has another surprise in store for Louis XIV, and much will be written about. Versailles, May 12, 1664, the grand celebration of Louis XIV continues. Molière is overexcited. He will finally perform for the king the play whose plot he explained to him a few days earlier. a comedy mocking the bigots, those opposed to pleasures so sought after by the young sovereign. For Molière, the gamble is daring.
He will put on stage the satire of what is at the heart of the religious practice of the Catholic Church in France. That is to say, devotion. What is the life of a devout? It is staying secular, living in the world, being married, having children, but in God. And how do you live in God while staying in the world? You need to have a spiritual director. But the problem is that this spiritual advisor has a fondness for good food and pleasures. And then, when the beautiful Elmire appears, he cannot resist. He sort of breaks down and opens up to her. Why criticize him? Because now he has fallen into hypocrisy. Hence the title of the first version of the play, Tartuffe, or the Hypocrite.
Molière ventures there into an almost forbidden area since he stages religion, something that has never been done before.
Molière observe. He thinks he has won the game.
He thinks the play will please the king, that he will laugh.
But in the audience, some have difficulty hiding their discomfort, and Molière notices it. The clergymen accompanying the king cannot stand seeing how Molière caricatures one of their own. This satirical portrait will cause him issues.
And the next morning, at 5 o'clock, the king leaves for Fontainebleau, leaving Molière alone facing the court. And within the court, there is this black mass.
This black mass is the company of the Blessed Sacrament, the secret society of the devout who do not wish to call it quit. They complain directly to Anne of Austria, the mother of Louis XIV.
The king does what he wants, but he can't upset Mom.
And so the king, for general religious politics reasons, has to tell Molière, "You must not perform this play."
After applauding the play, the king will accept the ban that will be pronounced.
The devout are unleashed. One of them even suggests burning Molière.
It's terrible. Imagine that the Archbishop of Paris excommunicates anyone who goes to see the play. He is saying that hell opens under your feet if you enter the theater to see this play.
Molière, the star of his time, discovers that he is only Jean-Baptiste Poquelin, an author surrounded by enemies.
For years, Molière will be invincible. Molière, yeah. But not Poquelin. He's back to being Jean-Baptiste, and everyone wants to do him in for years.
It's at the time of the cabal of the devout. Molière is a man in danger. And if he did not benefit from the personal protection of Louis XIV, he probably would have paid the price for his stances.
Molière is stunned. He does not understand why this violence is unleashed against him.
The marquises, the fop and précieuses, the cuckolds and the doctors, they all have suffered gently and pretended to be amused, but the hypocrites have all armed themselves against my comedy with terrible fury.
For 5 years, Molière has to fight to have his Tartuffe performed. He is troubled by this affair. It keeps him up at night. At night, he tosses and turns in bed to no avail, and ends up getting up to go over the text of his play again and again. But there's no question of changing its meaning or submitting.
You can see that he refuses to integrate in a certain way. There is undoubtedly in him a desire to correct morals.
Molière will rewrite his play. He will change the title to Tartuffe, or the Impostor. Well, it's a small change. It's a layman, no longer a religious figure. He will try to soften the critique against the church.
Despite that, the play will be banned by Monseigneur Hardouin de Perifix. So a verdict is made. It's terrible.
Agri. Molière sends a formal request to the king to finally be able to perform a revised version of his Tartuffe.
very bold thing for me to bother a great monarch in the midst of his glorious conquests, but in the state I find myself, where, sire, can I find protection?
Molière will even send 2 actors, Lagrange and La Torriguère, to the camp in Lille, since Louis XIV is in the process of conquering the Spanish Netherlands.
Can you imagine the importance of the matter? The king is at war. Can you imagine going to the front in Verdun to bring the authorization to perform your play when you are Feydeau? It seems completely disproportionate as a story.
Louis XIV does not have time to deal with these matters. He says, "We'll see on my return. We will take care of it." But in fact, it is necessary for Molière to yield. It is not possible to accept this play written this way.
Molière knows well that an actor cannot be a king's priority. In reality, in the 17th century, an actor is nothing.
The actor is the disreputable character. It is the one who, by his very nature, by the very falseness of his role, becomes an enemy of society.
The Christian Church has always ostracised, rejected actors. In the canon law of the Middle Ages, they are declared as infamous in the literal sense of the term, meaning without reputation. As a result, they are not allowed to testify in court, for example. Which means that when an actor is going to die, if he wants to be buried in church ground, thus receive the last sacraments, the last rites, he must deny the profession of actor. That is to say, he renounces the profession of actor and swears on his deathbed that he will never be an actor again.
Despite the incessant attacks from the church, Molière will eventually perform his Tartuffe in public. But this battle will have plunged him into depression. They say he was disgusted by human nature.
Il y a un pessimisme qui règne dans le XVIIe siècle sur la nature humaine. Il y a ce catholicisme qui est de plus en plus puissant, et il y a la cour qui ridiculise tous les gens, et il y a la grande tradition des moralistes géniaux qui voient comme le cœur de l'homme est plein d'ordures, disait Pascal, c'est-à-dire une vision de l'homme assez pessimiste qui, moi, évidemment, me touche énormément. Le Misanthrope, c'est la mise en abîme d'abord d'une amitié, comme dit Jouvet, Alceste et Philinte. Il y en a un qui est un caricatural, un rebelle inadapté, il s'appelle Alceste, il veut pas de la société comme elle est. Et Philinte est l'intelligence, l'adaptation, c'est le génie de comprendre que la société est comme ça, qu'on ne la changera pas, et que si tout le monde disait la vérité, en une seconde, il y aurait le chaos dans la société. Il faut toujours imaginer, avant la première phrase d'un auteur, qu'est-ce qu'il s'est passé 20 minutes ou 1 heure avant. Il s'est passé qu'ils ont été à un cocktail. Il y a un Jack Lang de l'époque qui a dit beaucoup de bien à Philinte. Et Philinte va voir Alceste et lui dit « Bon, je me suis fait, tu peux pas t'imaginer, il m'a rasé, c'est un fâcheux. Mais comment s'appelle-t-il ? Je me rappelle plus, j'ai dû supporter son laïus épouvantable. » Et là, l'autre s'en va dans un état de haine, quitte le cocktail, arrive comme un fou, et l'autre va lui dire « Toutes les semaines, tu me fais une scène, qu'est-ce qu'il y a encore ?» En réalité, c'est « Qu'est-ce donc ? Qu'avez-vous » Et l'autre répond « Merde. » Tu m'entends? Merde! Oh, merde! Mais, merde! Qu'est-ce donc? Qu'avez-vous? Faut qu'arriver à nourrir le laissez-moi, je vous prie, laissez-moi, je vous prie, par un merde intérieur. L'autre dit, oh, mais encore, dites-moi quelle bizarrerie. Merde! Laissez-moi là, vous dis, je te dis, je veux pas te parler. Et courez-vous cacher. On entend les gens au moins sans se fâcher. Moi, je veux me fâcher. Il ne veut point t'entendre. Dans vos brusques chagrins, je ne puis vous comprendre. Et quoi qu'ami, enfin, je suis moi, votre ami. Mais riez cela de vos papiers. J'ai fait jusqu'ici profession de l'être, mais après ce qu'en vous je viens de voir paraître, je vous déclare net que je ne le suis plus, et ne veut nulle place en des cœurs corrompus. Il s'approche, hein. Je suis donc bien coupable, Alceste, à votre compte. Qu'est-ce que j'ai fait de mal? Par ta main. Allez, vous devriez mourir de pure honte. T'entends l'excès? Vous devriez mourir de pure honte. Une telle action, il a simplement dit bonjour à un ministre, hein. Une telle action ne saurait s'excuser, tout homme d'honneur s'en doit scandaliser.
Vous accablez un homme de caresses et témoignez pour lui les dernières tendresses, de protestations, d'offres et de serments. Vous chargez la fureur de vos embrassements, et quand je vous demande après quel est cet homme, à peine pouvez-vous dire comme il se nomme. Là, c'est du génie, ça. Écoutez mieux. Ah, merde, Philindy, tu commences à me gonfler. Quittez toutes ces incartades. Le monde, par vos soins, ne se changera pas. T'as pas l'ego de penser que tout seul, tu vas changer tout. Le monde, par vos soins, ne se changera pas. Et puisque la franchise a pour vous tant d'appât, je vous dirai tout franc que cette maladie, partout où vous allez, donne la comédie.
Among the tragedians, Molière is also upset with Racine, who first sought his services before betraying him.
Racine, a very ambitious character as well, realizes that Molière might not be the best way to advance in the king's favor.
And all moves are allowed. One day in 1665, the divine Marquise du Parc is getting ready for a rehearsal. She remains the most beautiful actress in Molière's troupe, despite the recent loss of her husband. Molière has always been susceptible to her charms. What he doesn't know is that she is expecting a visitor, the man who has become her lover. Bad surprise. It's Racine. He is not welcome. But if he comes to defy Molière like this, it is to poach his actress. And he managed to persuade Du Parc to leave Molière and become the leading actress at the Hôtel de Bourgogne, where she will soon play Andromaque. Molière is shocked.
Molière is absolutely furious and very jealous. The quarrel will be very deep, and there will never be a reconciliation between Racine and Molière.
But Molière is not at odds with all tragedians. Rouen, summer 1658. For the past few weeks, Molière has been regularly working in an apartment on Rue de la Paix. The owner of this apartment is none other than Pierre Corneille, the great Corneille whom Molière admires and whose plays he has often performed in the provinces. Receiving advice from the master, the height of joy. But why is he here exactly? The mystery remains unsolved.
Is this where a secret understanding, a pact, might have been born, according to which Corneille would be the true author of Molière's plays?
The story comes to us from Pierre Louis, who in 1919, in two magazines, Le Temps and Comédia, published 6 articles claiming that it was Corneille who wrote all of Molière's plays. And when asked for proof, he says, "All those who ask me for proof are nothing but toads."
Pierre Louis is a writer who has already been the author of several hoaxes, it must be said.
Never had anyone even had the slightest hint of an idea affirming that Corneille wrote most of Molière's major plays.
And Pierre Louis has followers. The speed with which Molière improved his writing after his time with Corneille in Rouen seems suspicious to them.
Until then, he was performing crude farces like Gorgibus in the Bag, the farce of the Barbouillet, things like that. And suddenly, a few months later, after visiting Corneille, he starts writing in the purest language of the 17th century. So here is the kind of text Molière writes at the beginning of the year 1658. I, a doctor, sir, I am ready to do all you please, but as for being a doctor, I say no. I am your servant, I will be nothing of the kind. I ask you how I should set about it. Goodness me, sir. And the same year, a few months later, here is what you have. So that I have come to consult you to know whether his love is likely to meet with any success, being well assured that from your mouth I may learn truly the secret which concerns us. This transfiguration is inexplicable. It has never existed in any work. In the work of no author in literature will you find a transfiguration of this kind. To explain this, the biographers tell us, it's the Molière miracle. As for me, I have a hard time believing in miracles.
To settle the question, lacking proof, we tried with technology. For 20 years, scientific studies have succeeded each other to demonstrate that Corneille wrote in place of Molière, but the latest one, published in 2019, says the opposite. The method used is quite complex. It involves transforming texts by Molière, Corneille, and other authors of their time into computer data and comparing them.
What we see here is the result of a statistical analysis that classified the texts, somewhat like classifying different animal species in their relationships with one another. And we see groups emerging, we call these clusters, which correspond to the works of different authors. Here we see a group which is that of the works of Molière. It stands out very clearly from the works of Corneille, which are at the opposite end of this analysis. We can clearly see the distance separating the works attributed to Molière, shown in green from those attributed to Corneille, in red at the other end of the graph. We observe a form of stylistic fingerprint that is unique to each individual and depends on the frequencies with which they use the words of a language. Moliere's stylistic fingerprint is unique to him and in any case is not at all the same as Corneille's.
The only play officially signed by Corneille and Molière in 1671 is Psyché, a play composed of theater and ballets, a genre in which Molière excelled for the greatest pleasure of his king. Vaux-le-Vicomte Castle, summer 1661. For the first time, Molière is working in a duo. It is the greatest artistic collaboration of the 17th century. To Jean-Baptiste, the Italian composer Lully, the French playwright Molière, together to dazzle a famous king. The stakes are high, a gigantic party hosted by the estate's owner, Nicolas Fouquet, superintendent of finances for Louis XIV. For the occasion, Molière has written a comedy and is seeking inspiration with Lully to include a song. Each is trying to impress the other.
These are two geniuses, the two Jean-Baptiste. Two adventurers as well. That is to say, both Lully and Molière are ready for anything. Molière was very musical. On his mother's side of the family, everyone played the violin. So, they are really at a high level.
The collaboration between these two geniuses will work for a very long time because each, in essence, rivals in ambition. It's something very creative.
They have value. They know their value. And both have a very unique ability to express themselves. Molière makes all the faces. He imitates a lot. He imitates all the accents. Lully, he knows how to play everything. He's on the harpsichord. He's on the violin. He writes for choirs. He writes both playful dances, but he also writes sacred music. So together, they will go very, very fast and very far.
And the king is delighted because he managed to unite these two figures who in his youth essentially represented theatrical art and the art of dance.
The union of Molière and Lully began to take shape a few weeks before the party.
We stand here in the Hall of the Muses, a room that was once the Chambre des Muses, since it was the bedroom of Nicolas Fouquet. It is July 1661. The castle is not finished. There must still be craftsmen, workers, busy with the final preparations for a celebration that will take place a few weeks later.
As an introduction, Molière performs a first play on this stage for Nicolas Fouquet and his guests.
Fouquet loved arts. He already uses Vaux-le-Vicomte as a tool of propaganda to showcase his taste. He has a great power and influence over the arts, over the artists whom he sponsors. And Molière will be part of this troupe he maintains around him and will be a close friend of Fouquet.
Here, theater is everywhere, even in the furniture.
So there, I would like to show you this piece of furniture. It is a cabinet. It's an essential piece of furniture in a stateroom where the master of the house will showcase his wealth and his culture. I would like to open it with you and immediately notice that inside we simply have a theatre. We have a theatre in perspective with trompe-l'oeil of extraordinary preciousness and finesse. We have this balustrade that is made in bone, these twisted columns in painted wood. The most important thing about this cabinet is to know that it is French manufacture from the 17th century, and it is a typical classic piece for hiding things. What a joy it is to have in front of or next to the stage where Molière performed, a theatre and a very classic antique set from that era.
Everything is ready for the big day. 1 month later, Fouquet receives Louis XIV and his court. And this grand event is not just about theater.
The entire court moves from Fontainebleau, about 400 carriages arriving in this vast plain. Fouquet shows them the magnificent castle he had built and has the king pass through. His study. And on the desk, there is a candle lighting up something. A portrait. The portrait of Mademoiselle de la Vallière. We learned later that Fouquet had offered money to Mademoiselle de la Vallière in exchange of her favors. Taking the king's mistress for a whore. It's not nice. The king is furious. He will only be able to calm down during the Bours.
The Bours is the title of the play that Molière decides to perform for the occasion. And it's in the gardens, in this open-air theater, that the performance will take place.
Here we are at the Grille d'Eau, a few hundred meters from the castle, and these terraces will host the representation of the Bours. Molière will perform the 9 Bours, so 9 different characters. And to give these characters time to change costumes, there will be musical interludes with music by Lully and Beauchamp. It's really the best artists of the 17th century working together. And we have an absolutely essential actress at that time, Madeleine Béjart, who will come out of a seashell, naked with trees watching her and approaching her. We are witnessing the first special effects. People are truly amazed by so many surprises. And that's how music integrates into theatre. And we have this first comedy ballet written at Vaux-le-Vicomte on the 17th of August, 1661.
At the end of this grand celebration, Fouquet will be disgraced. Molière, on the other hand, has found a new playmate, this Florentine who has begun his irresistible rise in the service of the first cousin of Louis XIV.
Lully was sort of a street artist when he arrived at 14 years old in the court of the Grande Mademoiselle, and she finds him so ugly that she relegates him to the kitchens. And then the little Lully becomes passionate about Mademoiselle's violins and will very quickly become the head of Mademoiselle's violins, composer, lyricist, playing the violin himself, dancing, a man who has a lot of qualities, but also many flaws. He's very ambitious and quick-tempered.
The impetuous Lully succeeded in entering the service of Louis XIV, and it will be very useful to him.
It's Lully who makes the king dance in 1653 during the Ballet of the Night.
It is a type of ballet in which the king himself and the best dancers among his courtiers and some ladies of the court make entrees or numbers. They are dressed as the sun, as gypsies, as princes, etc., and they come to dance.
The king, he doesn't just dance the minuet. No, he starts by stretching. He He has amazing thighs, and he does the famous king's turn. He really is a professional dancer.
By making Louis XIV dance, Lully, just like Molière, serves a king that barely recovered from the 5 years of the Fronde that tottered his throne.
This desire to bring the two men closer is perfectly understandable in the sense that he wants to exert a royal policy of control over the arts. Before Mazarin's death, Louis XIV cannot deal with high politics, foreign affairs relations, and others. So it is his reserved domain, and Molière and Lully are there at the center of this reserved domain.
Their inexhaustible inspiration leads Molière and Lully to Chambord. Chambord, the setting for Louis XIV's Great Autumn Hunts. The king is so fond of it that he is going to have the castle built by Francis I remodeled. Today, the theater of Molière and Lully's exploits has been reconstituted there.
We are here on the first floor of the Château de Chambord, at the place where Jacques Garcia proposed a restoration of the theater, called Molière's Theater. It was a temporary theater that King Louis XIV had built during his hunting trips in the fall at Chambord. Obviously, this reconstitution is a bit smaller than originally, when you consider that there were the actors, the musicians, the dancers as well. And so in front of the stage you had the two armchairs of the king